Hi, my name is Kelly Kuzhnaw, and my dream is that everybody finds success and fulfillment in their work. There's nothing quite like knowing your work makes a difference in the lives of others. In this module, we're going to talk about empowerment and specifically levels of freedom or a method of measuring empowerment. The key points that I hope to cover are what is empowerment? Why would you want to measure it? How can you measure it? What can you do with that measurement? And as always, I'll give you something to try to do with this particular tool. I'm going to begin with the definition of empowerment. I looked it up, and the dictionaries don't actually have the word empowerment. They have the word empower, or the verb. And the verb means to give power or give authority to something, someone, an organization, that kind of thing. Empowerment does exist in business vocabulary, and it means it's a management strategy that intends to give employees the tools and resources they need to make confident decisions without having someone looking over their shoulder and second guessing everything that they're doing. So on the right side of the screen, you can see that the three forms of the word are empowerment, which is a strategy. Empower is that verb to give power. So if you're a leader and you want to empower those who work for you, you empower them and give them power. And empowered is a state of having power. So if I am an employee, I will have power if you've empowered me. So how do you experience empowerment? Since you're a leader and unless you're the owner of the company, you're in the middle somewhere. You have leaders above you and you have people that you lead. So when you consider yourself from the boss's perspective, how empowered do you feel? What does that feel like? Stop the video and take a moment and think about that. Okay, so here are some thoughts that people have shared about what makes them feel empowered by their boss. When they have confidence in me, I'm not second guessed. When I feel respected by them. When I'm not micromanaged, I'm given a task and they let me run with it. They're open-minded to my suggestions and they listen and allow me to implement it whether I'm right or wrong. So then the next obvious question is, how do you empower others, those people you lead? I'm going to give you another moment to turn the video off and think about that. Now that we understand what empowerment is, let's talk a little bit about why would we even empower? What's the big deal? I see advantages from three different perspectives. First of all, from the perspective of the company, imagine that you're a company owner here for a moment. If the company has implemented a strategy of empowerment, the people who are doing the work make the decisions. The people who are doing the work day in and day out, they really are the ones who know the most about it. And finding a way to equip them, we don't want to just delegate, we want to equip them so they're successful. They can make those decisions confidently. Just imagine how far your company could go having all that knowledge and the ability to actually tap into it and rely on it. When you're the leader, and again, unless you're the owner, you're a leader that's kind of in the middle somewhere here. When you empower other people, that gives you freedom to make more strategic decisions for the company. If you're no longer having to worry about some of the smaller things that are going on, if you've empowered your employees to take care of that, you are now free to go out and negotiate with your peers in the company, perhaps connect with customers or suppliers and find out more about how you can move the company forward or your department within that company. And then the third perspective is when you're an employee. When you are empowered, you'll get to have that satisfaction and dignity of knowing that you're making a difference. You're not just showing up and being a physical body. Your brain is engaged. You make a difference. Without you, they're not as strong as they are with you. So that's why we would even worry about empowering. So now let's get on to the measuring, the thing that you've been looking forward to. The first reason that we measure is to walk the talk. Most of you are here today because you believe in improvement. And if we want to improve empowerment or get better at empowerment, we have to be able to measure it so we know what to do. The whole concept of a current or a baseline measurement, and then a future measurement, and then making a plan to get there. Another reason that we measure is the actual process is very helpful. First of all, to clarify assumptions about what is. How empowered are you? Frankly, you could feel like you're rather empowered. Like, didn't you give me the title? Shouldn't I have the authority to do everything that comes with this title? I mean, I've been in that job for a week. I can't imagine why I don't have the authority to do what I need to do. The second would be having this metric, intangible as it might seem, it gives us a target where we can mutually agree on how empowered should I be. It's very likely that a team leader might never be asked or responsible for making a hiring decision. Their recommendation is very helpful and so forth, but that might never be part of their set of responsibilities. And then, as I mentioned a moment ago, if we understand where we're at and we know where we're supposed to go, then we can be intentional about getting from where we are to where we want to be. One of the leaders that I work with, he made a comment that I thought was very applicable to this concept of clarifying assumptions. He said, please be direct so I don't have to read between the lines. I can't imagine how freeing this will be to at least understand where you're at and not knock your head against the wall thinking you have the power to do something when you don't, or thinking you will have the power to do something when in reality that might not be part of the plan. So I think this is a fabulous exercise to go through with your boss. So here is an example of how you can measure empowerment. Again, the title that I use is Levels of Freedom. And here's an example from driver's license. Admittedly, I'm a bit old and I've had my driver's license for a long time, and I came from the era when the process was I would take driver's training. In fact, I took my driver's training when I was about 15 and a half years old. Then I needed to have a driver's permit for 6 months. And as long as I drove for 6 months under the permit with my parents in the car and I turned 16, then I could get my driver's license. Seems simple enough. And who wouldn't? 16-year-old indispensable child attitude and all of that. Who wouldn't think that the moment you get your driver's license, you have all the privileges in the world? I mean, shouldn't I be able to go anywhere I want, whenever I want, with whoever I want in the car? Somehow that isn't the case, or at least it wasn't for me. My parents had a vested interest in their car, because I certainly didn't have my own, and they had a vested interest in the safety of me, and I'm really so glad that they did. So this diagram is an example of understanding levels of freedom and measuring empowerment. On the left side, going up the axes, is my freedom, or it measured in terms of different aspects of driving the car. How free am I? And you can see at the top 5, I have maximum control, and down at the bottom, number 1, my parents have total control. And if you look across the bottom, my parents have, on the left, they have no anxiety, and on the right, they are stressed out to the max. So let's just go through these stages of becoming empowered to drive their car from the time that I got my driver's license. So at level 1 of freedom, my parents have total control over when I drive the car and where I drive the car. And noticing over to the left where I said aspects, they might choose who I can have in the car. They might choose what I can do in the car. They might choose not just like physically where I'm going, but am I going to a football game or things like that. Maximum control. They have all the control. I have no freedom. Level 2 is where we've advanced a little bit, and if I ask, or when I ask, my parents might let me drive to certain locations at certain times of the day. I mean, they still have that right of refusal, but in general, they might let me, but I certainly have to ask. At level 3, their anxiety, they're not quite as stressed anymore. And in fact, they're kind of building on the trust. I'm building trust with them. I might have authority to take the car to certain places, like I can go to the grocery store without issue. I can pick my sisters up from school, certain things like that. Your parents might have been different, but I think that probably was acceptable for me. And I can do this whenever I want to, but I have to let them know first. So that might mean calling my mom at work and saying, hey, Mom, I'm going to drive the car to school. Just want you to know. Not necessarily having to ask permission, but just to let them go, or to let her know that I'm going. At the 4th level, I might have the authority to drive the car whenever I want, but I still have to ask about certain locations. Like they don't mind I hold the keys. I don't have to turn the keys in at the end of every trip. They're actually in my purse and I can go wherever I want. But certain locations, like I'd like to drive to the north side of Chicago and I live in Indiana, that might be a problem. Yet they would still have a certain amount of anxiety over that. And then lastly, probably when I was 18 or 19, I had full control. Now, I might have to own my own car as well, but it's possible that they have devoted a car to the kids, and I was the one that got to drive that car, and I could do it with maximum control. So this is an example from driving and understanding parents' anxiety, and really that's what it is, you know, kind of this opposite thing of trust. How much do they trust me, and managing their anxiety. They're, you know, I was just too valuable of a resource to risk. So kind of a risk management. Here's another example that came to mind when I was putting this together. Years ago, we hired a financial planner, and when that planner, Dave, was trying to ask us about what services we really wanted from him, he had a scale as well. His, from my memory, only had 4 pieces to it. But starting at the bottom of the scale, actually I'll start at the top. No trust. I had no trust in him. He had to tell me absolutely everything. At the second level, I would allow him to make plans for our money, but he had to ask me first about what he wanted to invest or what he wanted to sell, and then I could give him permission to do that. The next level of trust with Dave was that he would go ahead and make an investment or a sales offer, and then he would let me know after the fact. And then the third, or the highest level of trust with my financial planner, was more about, you just do it, and if I have an issue, I'll call you. So that was there's another example of empowering my financial planner to take care of my finances. So now I'd like to talk about your levels of freedom at work. Notice on the left side, there are 2 aspects to consider. One is your entire job, or maybe more appropriately are certain tasks or responsibilities in your job. For example, budgeting. You could have a certain level of empowerment with budgeting, but not necessarily with human resource related issues. And I'll give you a couple specific examples of those in a minute. Here I show the same scale that you just watched with the driving example, but now we're talking about your job. So at the lowest level of freedom, basically your boss has control over everything, and neither of you have actually even considered whether you're empowered or how empowered or where you're empowered. The second level is where the subject has started to come up, but your boss is really nervous about it and he hasn't really given you anything yet. The third level is where the boss says, feel free to do these things, but let me know before you do them. Kind of like I did with my financial planner. The fourth level is that you have the ability to act, but you have to report it afterwards. And then the fifth level is that you have control over when you do things and what you do things. Please know I'm not hung up on the actual words that are used on the scale. In fact, if you can perfect it and make it easier for people to understand, that would be great. Anything that makes it helpful for you to be a tool. This is a tool, it's not meant to manage you. So I promised a couple of examples. Here's an example of budgeting. My husband used to work for a company where they went through a very rigorous budgeting process every November, and it went up the chain. Here's what I want to spend, and then it came back down the chain. Okay, this is how much you get to spend. And then at the beginning of the next year, when the budget actually went into effect, they literally had to ask again every time they wanted to spend the money. That to me does not show a lot of empowerment. It might be possible that you get budgetary approval for the year, and you're free to spend whenever you want within those budget categories, but you might not have the power to switch. Like, well, I've decided that instead of buying this piece of equipment, I'm going to hire another person. That might not be acceptable. You get the idea. There might be different aspects, not just of your job, but even within an area of responsibility that you either do or don't have freedom to do. So here's something that I recommend that you do to start the conversation with levels of freedom. For you and your boss, select 2 to 3 of these key tasks or areas of responsibility that you want to address in terms of empowerment. Make sure you come to agreement. It might be that you go forward and propose this to your boss, however you want to do that, but that the 2 of you agree. And then independently, you go off and you look at these tasks and you decide or analyze or assess where you think you're at. How much freedom do you feel that you have? At the same time, your boss will be going through that and trying to put a number on where they feel their level of anxiety or their level of trust, however that might go. This might take a couple of days, and then get back together and together talk about what you each came up with and why. Here's a little bit more detail. When you get into that conversation, do you agree on that level of freedom? And if not, that's not a bad thing. It just opens the door for discussion. And in fact, I suggest that you come up with example behaviors. What makes you think I am more empowered than I'm not? Here's an example where I tried to do something and you stopped me from doing that. It just makes it more of a data type or facts and data type conversation instead of an emotional, pointing your finger at each other. And then, as I know at the bottom of this screen, talk about, start the conversation about the future. Will you really ever have full budgetary responsibility in your current role? Sometimes team leaders don't have that. Sometimes supervisors don't have that. But perhaps if you will both agree that you're at a level 2 now and you think you should be at a level 4, maybe not 5, but at a level 4, well, now you have a target. And as we all know in our continuous improvement environment, it's good to know where you're at, where you want to go, and then how you can get there. Before I summarize this session, I want to remind you of what the world might look like when empowerment exists throughout the company. What will it feel like for you as a person working under a boss to be empowered, to have the power to do the things that you think you're capable of doing? What will it feel like for you to have people below you doing more and you can do less of what they actually can do on their own? What might you be able to accomplish together? So go ahead and try this. Use that graph or put your own words on it, however you'd like to do that. Select a couple of areas, talk to your boss about, have the empowerment conversation, then select one of your key employees that is a collaborator and sit down and repeat the exercise on areas of responsibility within their job. And if you can, either in a networking group or a colleague at work, get together on an occasional basis and talk about how empowerment is going. Is it getting better? What are some of the obstacles that you're encountering? And keep moving it forward. I'm glad you care about your work and the people you work with. Leaders like you encourage me to do my best and remind me that my work is valuable too. Be sure to celebrate at least something every day. You could celebrate something you tried, You could celebrate what you learned from a failure, and you can celebrate any forward movement for you, your team, or your company. Have a blessed day.